Revati from Computer Science Department in the College of Government Engineering College, Sengipati. Now I am going to explain the concept of concurrency control in database management system. So basically concurrency is coming for multi-programming. So multi-programmer and multi-user accessing this database at a time means that is a concurrency execution, concurrent execution of more than one user. So we are coming for this concurrency control when the multi-programming environment where the multiple transaction can be executed simultaneously. It is highly important to control the concurrency of transactions. So we have a concurrency control protocol to ensure the atomicity and isolation serializability of concurrency transaction. So the ACID property of database must be applied to the concurrency control. So the concurrency control protocol can be broadly divided into three categories. So one is log based protocols, timestamp based protocols, validation based protocols. So log based protocols is it is a first method. What is a log means we are getting a permission to accessing the resources. So the database is a resource. I have to use a data means I need a permission to log the resource. What is a lock means I cannot provide this lock to I cannot allow other transaction to access the data. So that is a lock. So once I have a permission to lock the database means other transaction cannot execute the cannot access the data of the database. So because multi-programming at a time more than one transaction can get the data from database, but the data updation may be changed and the values are changed. It produce a deadlock like that. So for that we are controlling the database access, resource access by using a log based protocol. So the log based system equipped with log based protocols use a mechanism by which any transaction cannot read or write a data until it acquires an appropriate lock on it. So it is don't write any data from other transaction on the database. So once I get a permission for lock the resources means I am only executing the read operation, write operation on all the updations. After I am releasing my data only, I am going to release this permission to next transaction. Till I am waiting for next to another transaction is waiting for granting a permission. So that is lock system. So for that we can avoid the database value changes, and that is the updations, corrections. These are all malfunctions. These are all reduced by these protocols. So the log based protocol are divided in two types. One is binary lock and another one is shared and exclusive. So what is binary lock means once I have provided a lock or otherwise unlock. So there is a two state, that is the value is 1, the resources is locked, the value is 0, the resources is released. Like that I am giving a two condition, that is like a switch is on, that is lock condition, switch is off, that is unlock, the resources are released. So acquiring resource and release resource. So this is a two condition. But shared and exclusive means some type of operation cannot change the database values, just it get the values only, that is copy of value only, just it get the information from the database. At that time we can share the data to others also. So I have two options, shared and exclusive. So if I am using my database or other transactions use a read operation only, then I have a permission to share the data to other transaction also. So more than one transaction can get the copy of data from the, that is read the data from the database, but write operation cannot get the value from the cannot provide the lock to the other transaction, because after performing a write operation the database consistent value is changed to other state, that is consistent state to one consistent state to other consistent state is changed. So if the transaction may be aborted or it may be recovered, so like that any transaction, if the transaction is completely successful means the database consistent state is changed from one state to other state. So we cannot provide a lock to the other transaction, because other transaction can also change the data. So first we have to lock, the lock is given to write operation means after releasing the lock only we can provide the permission to other transaction, that is called exclusive lock. And shared lock means more than one transaction can get the value from the read operation. Database can get the data from the database by using read operation. There are four types of lock protocol: simplistic lock, a pre-climbing lock protocol, two-phase locking protocol, and strict two-phasing locking protocol. And the famous protocol for databases two-phase locking protocol. So this is comfortable for all database networking multi-programming environment. So here the two-phase locking protocol, it is also known as 2PL protocol, is a method of concurrency control in database management system that ensure the serializability by applying a lock to the transaction data, which blocks other transaction to access the same data simultaneously. So here the serializability is achieved by blocking other transaction cannot accessing the same data. So two-phase locking protocol helps to eliminate the concurrency problem in DBMS. So here this locking protocol divide the execution phase in the three different parts, that is first part, first phase, second phase, and third phase. So what is three phase means I am giving a permission and releasing the permission, that is divided into three parts. So first part, the transaction begins to execute, that is it requires a permission for the lock, so it send a request to get the resources, that is the first phase. Second phase is where the transaction obtain all locks. So here all locks are provided, and after performing the updations, read operation, write operation, and completion of all operations, then the lock first it will releases a lock to the other. So now the transactions are locked, but we can acquire the permission to the next transaction. So we can that next transaction which is a priority, highest priority, that having accessing the transaction. So the first phase is released. So if the transaction is in the second phase means all the resources are locked by the all the transactions are, all the databases are resources are locked by the transaction, but the first phase is free. So next transaction is enter into the first phase. So next, after completion of second phase, that is execution of operations, the transaction goes to third phase. So what is a third phase means the transaction cannot demand for a new locks, and it releases it releases acquired locks, that is I don't need any other locks, now I am free, I completed the work, so I have to release my lock. So in the third phase it complete the execution and release the lock. At the time the next process is acquiring the after acquiring the permission, it goes to the second phase, that is other transaction. So one process, first transaction is in the second phase, then second transaction is in the first phase. If the first transaction is in the third phase, then the second transaction goes to the second part. So like that, the serializability, so one by one, that serializability can be achieved in this two phase locking protocol. So this is a example and the phase executed in the locking system. So first occurring the lock, that is a growing phase, and executing the operation, that is locking phase, and then locked phase, and then shrinking phase that releases the lock. So basically the lock two phase locking protocol allows each transaction to make a lock in two steps. One is growing phase and shrinking phase. So growing phase means obtain the lock and but not release for any locks. Shrinking phase means transactions may release the lock but not obtain a new locks. So it is a very it offers a serializability, but here the problem is the local and global deadlock detectors are searching for deadlocks and solve them with resuming transactions to their initial stage. So that is a disadvantages in the locking phase. That is one transaction acquiring the resources for long time means after executing the transaction execution, then only the next transaction will be executed. The other transaction is also waiting for so much of time because of first transaction. So here it made the deadlock. So some operation depends on the one operation, other operation is also waiting. So that is a disadvantages. Next, time stamped. For that we are going for a time stamped based protocol. Timestamp based protocol in DBMS is an algorithm which uses the system time and logical counter as a timestamp to serialize the execution of concurrent transaction. The timestamp based protocol ensures that every conflicting read and write operation are executed in a timestamp order. That is, every operation we are allocating a some time, so using a logical clock value. So if the clock value is count value is 0, clock counter value is 0 means the lock is released and the permission is goes to the next transaction. It never waits for the first transaction that is not completed, it just go for the next transaction. So we can avoid the waiting time of other transaction. So we have to wait only for 3 minutes means that is acquiring the database by the transaction 1 for 3 minutes only. So after 3 minutes the lock control is over to the transferred over to the next transaction. So it does not, if the first transaction does not complete the process means after execution of all the transaction, then it come back to the first transaction is till it is not executed. So then only it executed to the at the last time. So here the first transaction only waiting in the waiting time, but other transactions are executed in fastly. So no transaction is wait for until the exceeded time. So that is the advantages of timestamp. So the older transaction here, the transaction having a timestamp, it based on the transactions priority. So here the priority is longer timestamp having a smaller timing execution. Smaller timing having a higher priority. It having acquiring a database for 5 minutes means that is having higher priority. 10 minutes means that is next priority. 15 minutes means the next priority. Like that the priority are assigned. So for that because of the timestamp counter value, here the waiting time of other processes reduced. Only the time based on the time only the locking is provided to the database. of transactions. The older transaction is always given priority in this method. It uses system time to determine the timestamp of the transaction. This is a most commonly used concurrency control. So log based protocol helps you manage the order between the conflicting transaction when they will execute. The timestamp protocol manages the conflict as soon as the operation is created. So here the conflict operation is transaction is also managed. Next one is validation based protocol. So the validation based protocol is an optimistic concurrency control technique. Is a method to avoid a concurrency in transaction. In this protocol, the local copies of a transaction data are updated rather than the data itself, which results in less interferences while execution of a transaction. So here the validation based does not give the permission to access the original data. It just give the updation on the local copies only. So if it is local copies means it does not need a lock to the whole database. It just get the copy of value to more than one transaction, and then it made the changes. So here the updation of a database cannot be made on a original database. It also in the duplicate copy. So for we have to avoid this. The updation is also made on the original data. For that we are dividing this phase into 3 phases: read phase, validation phase, and write phase. So what is a read phase means? In this phase, the data values from the database can be read by a transaction, but the write operation or updates are only applied to the local copies, local data copies, not the actual database. So that is just get the data copies, local copies, and get the read data. Then we can read the operation only, but write operation cannot be applied here. And validation phase, the data is checked to ensure that there is no violation of serializability while applying the transaction updates to the database. Here there is no violation is made, so the validation phases validation phase checks the data and the updations is made on the database. So after that we are going for a write phase. If the validation is successful, then only I am going to update the database. Otherwise I cannot save the data on the database, updated on the database, so the transaction is rolled back. So in the write phase, write phase, the updates are applied to the database. If the validation is successful, then only we can perform all the operation. Otherwise it recover to the old stage. So that is these are the 3 phases in the validation phase. And what is the characteristics of concurrency means? An ideal concurrency control DBMS mechanism has a following objective: must be resilient to site and communication failures. So that is the main characteristics. It allows a parallel execution of transaction to achieve a maximum concurrency. Its storage mechanism and computational methods should be modest to minimize overhead. It must enforce some constraint on the structure of atomic actions of transactions. Next, need for concurrency control. The reason for using a concurrency control in DBMS is to apply isolation through mutual exclusion between conflicting transaction. So mutual exclusion means more than one process having a conflict on this read-write operation. So we have to provide a exclusion. Mutual exclusion means one process executing at a time. That is a mutual exclusion. Next, to resolve the read and write conflict issues, and to preserve a database consistency through constantly preserving execution abstraction. So the consistency is mainly important in the database. The data must be stored in the consistent state. The database having a one consistent state to other consistent state, that must be execute the transaction successfully. So the consistency is important. Here the consistency is achieved by concurrency control protocols. The system needs to control the interaction among the concurrent transaction. This control is achieved using concurrent control schemes. The concurrency controls help to ensure the serializability. So serializability is a order of execution of a transaction is very important to executing the database management system. So the database management serializability management system uses a concurrency control for the serializability. So these are the concurrency control protocols and related needs and characters are explained.